What does war do to the human mind? What does prolonged exposure to war do to the human brain? What does war do to the human mind? Why are there so many soldier suicides? Why are so many veterans addicted to drugs and homeless? What does war do to the human mind? People go to war and come back.
Traumatic stress.
Traumatic stress. Traumatic stress. Have all of you heard the saying, war is hell? Even the people who support war will say that war is hell. War is one of the most traumatizing things a human being can go through. War drives people insane. So if human beings were naturally violent, why would war traumatize so many people? If human beings were naturally violent, why would war drive so many people insane? 98% of soldiers in war, in sustained combat, experience some form of psychological trauma. But 2% of soldiers can be exposed to war for long periods of time and kill and kill and kill and never go insane. So why is that 2% different? Why can 2% of soldiers be exposed to war for long periods of time and never go insane? And why can the other 98% not do that? What's different about that 2%? The reason why 2% of soldiers are never driven insane by war is because they were already insane before they went to war. That 2% is composed of psychopaths, people who want nothing more than to kill another human being. And 2% of people in American society and the military are psychopaths. But fortunately for us, they're the 2%, not the 98%. So another question. During World War II, what percent of soldiers in combat who had a chance to shoot at the enemy actually fired their weapons at the enemy? During World War II, what percent of soldiers in combat who had a chance to shoot at the enemy actually fired their weapons at the enemy? What do you think? Yes?
I think I actually heard this the other day, 25% shot to kill and 75 shot over.
Close. Everybody hear that? It was about 15%. About 15%. Much lower than what most people think, about 15%. Now, during the Vietnam War, what percent of soldiers in combat who had a chance to shoot at the enemy actually fired their weapons at the enemy? Was it higher, the same, lower? What do you think? Higher? How much higher? Guess a number.
Maybe 10% higher.
10%, 25%. It was around 15 to 20%, about 15% World War II. You're saying about 25 to 30% Vietnam. You'd think it'd be lower, right? Think about it. In World War II, we were fighting the Nazis, and Japan attacked us on our own soil. What did the Vietnamese ever do to us? Prior to the Vietnam War, most Americans had never even heard of Vietnam. But it was higher. It was much higher. It was about 90%. That's a drastic change in a short amount of time, right? During World War II, about 15% of soldiers in combat fired their weapons at the enemy. During the Korean War, it was about 55%. During the Vietnam War, it was about 90%. Today, it's nearly 100%. So what happened? What happened to cause that drastic change in such a short amount of time? What do you think? What changed? What happened? Yes?
Maybe propaganda in the media telling us that the enemy is bad versus in World War II we didn't know as much about the enemy.
Propaganda, that had a lot to do with it, and we'll talk about that next. We'll talk about that. But what happened was the training. The training changed. What happened was armies got better at training people how to kill. Armies got better at training people how to kill. The key term is training people how to kill. Killing is not nearly as easy as Hollywood makes us think. Most people have a very difficult time killing another human being, and armies must expend enormous effort in order to train people how to kill. And this problem goes back way before World War II. During the Civil War, soldiers spent 95% of their time loading their rifles and 5% of their time aiming and firing their rifles. So you would think that if thousands of rifles had been recovered from soldiers killed in combat during the Civil War, then most of them would not be loaded. But after the Battle of Gettysburg, they recovered about 27,000 rifles. 24,000 of the rifles, 90%, were loaded. 12,000 of the rifles had more than one bullet loaded in the barrel. 6,000 of the rifles had 3 to 10 bullets loaded in the barrel. And one of the rifles had 23 bullets loaded in the barrel. So soldiers were loading their rifles over and over again so it looked like they're doing something, but they weren't firing. So that shows you many of the soldiers in combat during the Civil War were not firing their weapons at the enemy. So during World War II at a rifle range, soldiers would fire at a target shaped like a round bullseye. During the Vietnam War at a rifle range, soldiers would fire at a target shaped like a human being. And that enabled more people to shoot and kill in combat. But think about that. If human beings were naturally violent, why would every army in history have to expend so much effort in order to train people how to kill? If we were naturally violent, most people would show up to boot camp and on day 2 they could kill people. But that's not the case. So another question. Have any of you read a book called On Killing, written by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman? It's a book all about killing. And it's one of the most uplifting books you will ever read because it shows that killing is a learned behavior. If you want to know where I got a lot of these stats and figures from, I got a lot of them from On Killing, about how many people shot in World War II, Vietnam, 98% sane, 2% psychopaths. I highly recommend you read that book. If you want to understand war and peace, On Killing is a must, because you learn how people are trained to kill. Very important book. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman was a West Point psychology professor and Army Ranger, and he wrote a book called On Killing, The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society, which was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. On Killing is required reading at West Point, it's required reading at the FBI Academy, and it's on the Marine Corps Commandant's required reading list. On Killing is also required reading in peace studies programs at Berkeley and in Quaker and Mennonite colleges. So people in the peace movement love this book. People in the military love this book. It's a very important book, and I highly recommend that you read it. But in On Killing, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman says that in order to wage war, a country must betray the enemy in a certain way. And every country in history must do this and has done this with no exceptions. Can any of you guess what that way is? How must a country betray an opposing group of people in order to wage war against them? What must a country do? Yes?
Dehumanize them.
Dehumanize them. Everybody hear that? Dehumanize them. A country must dehumanize them. It must take away their humanity. And this is done through what Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman calls distance. And he talks about 3 kinds of distance. The first form of distance is psychological distance. Psychological distance means betraying people as subhuman. And this is often done through derogatory name-calling. And in On Killing, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman talks about how our own country has used derogatory name-calling in war to portray people as subhuman. What do we call the Germans when we fought them? Krauts. What do we call the Japanese when we fought them? Japs. What do we call the Vietnamese when we fought them? What was the derogatory, a racial slur for the Vietnamese? Gooks. What do we call the people that were fighting in the Middle East today? What do you always hear in the media? Terrorists? The way that word is used, you would think everyone in the Middle East is a terrorist. What did the ancient Greeks call all non-Greeks? What did the ancient Greeks call all non-Greeks? What was the derogatory racial slur if you weren't Greek? Barbarian. It was a way of making fun of how people talked. The Greeks believed that if you weren't speaking Greek, then when you talked, it sounded like you were saying bar, 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 bar. So they called those people barbarians. So making fun of how people talk and saying that they're making animal noises is a subtle way to dehumanize them. A more overt way can be seen during the Rwandan genocide. Have any of you seen the movie Hotel Rwanda? What did they call the people being massacred on the radio? What did they call the people being massacred in Rwanda? Cockroaches. Cockroaches. The second form of distance is moral distance. Moral distance means I'm good, you're evil, and God is on my side. That is why civil wars are so bloody, because during a civil war, you look like the people you're fighting, you have the same language, customs, and traditions as them, so moral distance is used to make people believe that if you kill the enemy, you're expelling evil from the world. So psychological distance convinces people that they are not killing human beings, but subhumans and cockroaches, and moral distance convinces people that they are not killing human beings, but monsters and evil. And that makes moral distance very deadly. The third form of distance is mechanical distance. Mechanical distance means that it's easier to drop a bomb on someone at 10,000 feet than it is to shoot them with a rifle at 300 yards. It's easier to shoot someone with a rifle at 300 yards than it is to stab them with a knife at close range. So the farther away you are from someone, the easier it is to kill them.